Vulture, and welcome to episode number 6 of Ancient Landscapes with myself, Tine. In this 6-part series, I will be selecting some of my favourite landscapes in Ireland's ancient East and taking a journey back through the ages to uncover some of their hidden mysteries. We'll explore the ruins of some of our most famous landmarks and the myths and legends which reside there, with interviews from experts and amateur enthusiasts alike to guide us along the way. In this episode, named Buried Treasure at Chulainn Castle, we will peel away the layers on the Dundalk landmark commonly referred to as Chulainn Castle. We'll hear about some of its better-known inhabitants and the marks they made on the site's history and landscape, as well as delving into its most famous association with our best-known warrior. But we will also hear about the last, much lesser-known resident who lived in the castle until the 16th of June 1921, before being put out on the street along with her furniture and her livelihood. First, let us look back to the mythical beginnings of this commanding mound, which overlooks the Castletown River, the town of Dundalk, the Cooley Mountains and the Ring of Gullion. In the time of the Tuatha De Danann, there is disharmony on the island of Ireland, as the fierce Queen Maeve of Connacht drives her army eastward in order to claim the Brown Bull of Cooley for her own. She must restore the balance in her marriage of equals to her husband Ailill at any cost, lest she cede her rulership and all of her contracts to him. Ailill, having learned his lesson about pulling rank on his wife and Connacht's rightful ruler, has joined her on her quest, along with others who have scores to settle with Ulster and its leaders. Having left her seat of power in Rathcroghan and eventually made her way towards Dundalk, she was not met, as she'd expected, by the full force of Ulster's men. Unfortunately, the men of Ulster were somewhat preoccupied with the effects of the curse which had been placed on them by Macha, who had wished that when they needed it most, their strength would desert them for 9 days and nights, and that they would instead suffer the pain of childbirthing during that time. So rather than a fearsome host of thousands waiting with gleaming blades and armour, Queen Maeve finds only a single boy, poised and ready to oppose her and all the might of Connacht. The problem for Maeve is that the boy is no mere mortal. He is half human, half god, and he served such devastating supernatural blows to her armies every day as he fought them and every night as they slept, that she was forced to strike a deal with the boy named Cuchulainn. Instead of slaughtering her people by their hundreds and thousands, Cuchulainn will instead invoke his right to single combat and will fight each of her best warriors in turn. The place where he is said to have done this is at our very own Castle Mount, or Chulainn Castle. It happened sometime between Samhain and Imbolg, when the trees were bare and Cuchulainn would have been able to see his spiritual birthplace at Slieve Gullion, the place where the boy Setanta became Cuchulainn the warrior. Indeed, even today, if you visit the castle during the winter months, you can still see Gullion clearly to the north, just to the left of the single ancient standing stone in the field beside the mount, known locally by some as one of the 5 fingers of Cuchulainn. The site is undoubtedly the perfect place to head off any invaders from the south, and to prevent them from reaching the gap of the north beyond. Such was its strategic importance that when the Anglo-Normans made their way to Ireland in the 1170s, and large tracts of land in Louth and South Armagh were granted to Bertram de Verdun, a consort of King Henry II and Seneschal of Ireland under the king's son John, Bertram chose to make his home and seat of power in the same place Cuchulainn had chosen to face down Queen Maeve's warriors. It seems to have been common practice for Anglo-Norman lords to have built motte and bailey structures on existing Bronze Age ring forts. The sites would have offered a natural defensive advantage, being usually located on a high point in the landscape and surrounded by circular earthen embankments. This made them perfect for the simple addition of a timber or stone structure named a motte, and an enclosed courtyard named a bailey, which would have been surrounded by a ditch and enclosed by a wooden palisade which would keep animals in and invaders out. It would seem that any structure built on the mount we call Cuchulainn Castle was likely made of timber, since no remnants of it exist today. What we do see, though, is the influence that Bertram's chosen fortress had on the townlands around Dundalk. You may already be aware that the town square was not always the centre of Dundalgan. In fact, that's a comparatively recent change, made a mere 3 centuries ago, when most of what we now know as Dundalk town was reclaimed from the Irish Sea. Before that, the old settlement of Dundalgan was more westerly, in the shadow of Cuchulainn Castle and the antiquated townland we now call Castletown. There was actually a gate somewhere near the top of the Castletown Road or Church Street which protected the Augustinian friary and other structures which sprung up during the medieval era, all centred around Castletown and Chulainn's castle. For almost 600 years, Castletown remained the hub of Dundalk town, until the Lord Limerick James Hamilton came along in the early 18th century and decided to expand his holdings with an ambitious reclamation project which changed the face and location of the town forever. Mere decades after Hamilton's death, another notorious figure would take up the now empty site at Chulainn's castle. The site had been abandoned by its last inhabitants for reportedly being too difficult to draw water to in the absence of a river or well, but one man had the vision and the resources to build a lasting structure in stone atop the mound. It is the remains of this home which lie hidden among the clump of trees which distinguishes the landmark on its high position in the landscape just west of Dundalk. There can be seen the foundation walls of the old townhouse, amongst which a hexagonal room flanks the single intact Folly Tower, where a plaque details the name of its builder and the year it was built. Neptune's waves and Boreas blast have tossed me to and fro, until now I am come at last to harbour here below, where I hope my bones will be at rest until judgment day shall be. O good Christians who read this, I beg you will pray for me. These are the words carved on the family tomb which was built by the pirate Byrne in the old Castletown graveyard near to his home on the mount. We don't know the exact source of Patrick Byrne's wealth, but it is suggested by a great-grandnephew of his who wrote for the County Louth Archaeological Journal in 1908 that he may have been a privateer, aka a pirate with papers. It is said of Byrne that he used to flash signal lights of red and blue from his tower on the mount to his ships in the harbour below, effectively using his structure as a sort of lighthouse. In typical pirate form, Byrne has left a legacy of great stories, some of which have even more than a seed of truth to them. Many of these involve the souterrains which exist on and around the mount and have not, as yet, been exhaustively explored and mapped. Of course, a pirate knows how to make use of such a striking and mysterious feature in the landscape, and he would encourage tales of his treasure being buried down there and guarded by a magic cat who had to be shot with a silver bullet in order to get past it. Of course, most who heard this tale would probably never even have seen a silver bullet, let alone own one, but that didn't discourage one particularly intrepid band of would-be robbers who fancied their chances against the pirate Byrne and his magical cat. Their bullets, alas, weren't made of silver, and when one of them held their gun to Byrne's head as he roused from sleep inside his tower, he realised he was outnumbered and unarmed. With no shortage of cunning and a quick decision to treat his circumstances with good humour, he handed them the keys to all his doors and told them to help themselves, and also not to forget the big key which would unlock his cellar where he kept his wine, which they were also welcome to. Rather predictably, when the plundering was done, the men made their way to the cellar and got rotten drunk. Upon reaching the open air outside, one by one, they succumbed to their intoxication. One was found in a field near the castle, another face down on the Castletown Road. They were rounded up and tried at the next court session, after which they were hanged on Derry Hill on September 2nd, 1780. Patrick Clark, Philip McCormick, Michael Hickey, John Griffiths, Patrick Rourke, John Carnes and Simon Doyle were the men arrested. Doyle was found not guilty and the pirate tried to intercede on behalf of another who had stopped the gunman from pulling the trigger. Unfortunately, his plea was unsuccessful and that man was not only hanged, but supposedly had the hangman jump on his shoulders to ensure he was dead. The booty they'd tried to make away with was pitifully plain, consisting of knee buckles, salt shovels, tankards, seals, gold rings, 12 pair of stockings, £70 in money and one small piece of linen valued at £5. A far cry from the treasure we'd imagine when we think of a renowned pirate, yet whisperings of treasure at Chulainn's castle persist even today. In 1984, a local boy named James Wykes was with his father at the mount when they uncovered a fine gold filigree ring just a few inches into the soil. It was dated by the National Museum, who found that the ring itself was created around the 12th or 13th centuries, but that the stone at its centre was from 2nd or 3rd century Rome and was carved with a running hare. It is presumed to have been owned by a bishop or someone of similar rank. It's just as likely that it was owned by the museum, which was built from the ruins of Burns's Folly after it had been burned down several times in the intervening century, including once during the 1798 rebellion just a couple of years after Burns's death. The site had been purchased and renovated by the County Louth Archaeological Society, who established one of Ireland's earliest local history museums there in 1911. There was a great pageant called The Return of Chulainn, performed for the opening of the museum by the Oireachtas players on Ladies' Day, the 15th of August 1911. The players reproduced costumes and weapons of the era, and Irish war pipes were played by bands from Armagh and Whitecross. The play had to be performed twice because there were so many latecomers to the event. Its first caretakers were Owen Gernan and his family. But it is the last resident of Chulainn's castle who we'll be discussing with this week's guest in just a few moments. In the last episode, we heard about Rohesia de Verdun and her breathtaking achievement in building the impenetrable Roche Castle just outside Dundalk. But Rohesia is not the only woman to have held a castle in the area. In fact, the last resident of Chulainn's castle was a woman named Mrs. Culhane, the mother of Dundalk's famous patriot Patrick Culhane, after whom Culhane Street is named. Here to tell us about his memories of Mrs. Culhane and a childhood spent on the Mount is Damien Callan, local history enthusiast and winner of the long puck competition in the first ever Puck Fada, held in the Cooley Mountains in 1960.
Mrs. Culhane lived across number 21 Castletown Road, across the way from the Guard School. I remember going in there as a young lad, and my auntie was looking after her. There was no such thing as a carer at that time in the 60s. Like, just family came in and looked after whoever was ill. And I'd be going in there now, kind of on a regular basis, sort of, because I was very fond of that particular aunt that looked after her. And like the way it was for us, there was 10 of us, and we were between the two houses. And Mrs. Culhane died in 1965 at 93. So I definitely remember 1959 in particular, because I was captain of the school team. And I brought in the trophy to her. And lo and behold, who's in the place that day only? The great Frank Pagan, who would have been the commander-in-chief of the Downs, the IRA battalions in South Armagh Louth at that time. I said, this is the Ned Bailey Cup. Oh, sure, I know Ned Bailey. And he gave me half a crown. But Mrs. Culhane, I suppose, at that time was doting. Like, I mean, I would say she died in 93, to 65, she was well into her 80s. And she said to me on a couple of occasions, you know, I'd be in there with my aunt, she would have asked me, do you play around the Mount? She called it the Mount. I would say straight away, Chulainn's Castle. I would, we're up at Chulainn's Castle. Like, it was always Chulainn's Castle to us, and that was it. I was 12-year-old, like, around that time, and she told me, like, that she lived there. Now, she didn't talk about the fire or that night, you know, when she had to abandon the place and all the rest of it. Our furniture was saved anyway, so whether they carried out, took the furniture down from her and then tried to set the house on fire or something like that, you know. I used to think, you know, like, as a young lad, like, she lived out in the castle, like, you know, and I think she was telling me, you know, she was doting, sort of. But my auntie didn't know, because I remember saying it to my Auntie Breeze. I said, Mrs. Culhane lived in the castle where we play. And my auntie, like, I don't ever recall her ever saying to me, oh yeah, she did, she was the caretaker. She didn't know. It was only when I started doing the ancestry on the Callans and that I discovered different things about her. And also discovered that her own brother is married to my father's aunt, oldest aunt, on the Callans Lily. Had two sons that died in the First World War, 1916 and 1918. And Patrick Culhane and these boys would have been first cousins. So you had Patrick, who died a patriot in Dundalk, and he had his first cousins who was dying in France, like, you know, so all in relation to Mrs. Culhane. Became very interesting then, like, you know. The castle at that stage, like, was in ruins, you know, and you just couldn't have envisaged anybody, and you wouldn't have thought a woman like, you know, you wouldn't envisage Mrs. Culhane. I wasn't to know, like, that the thing that she was, it was turned into a museum, and that she was a living caretaker in it and that, like, you know. I never actually ever told any of my friends, like, we'd be very regular visits up around the castle, that, oh, you know, so, you know, Mrs. Culhane, like, you know, the woman my auntie looks after, she lived here. Like, you weren't going to say that, because it didn't just come in to the story, like, as far as we were concerned. And she had her own story, like, you know, like, at the same time, about the place, like, you know, how she, like, had to abandon the place. And, like, I mean, her own son had died for the cause. The IRA gave him a state funeral practically, and here he was. Within 9 months, her mother was homeless. Michael Collins actually paid for that funeral of our son. There was a lot of activity going on, but they said that the reason that Culholland's castle was hit was it was going to be taken over by the British. Were going to, just take it over as a garrison or something. And funny enough, I was just reading about that. That incident is actually 101 year on the 16th of June. It was 100 years last year. And that same night, that weekend, Eastwood's Castletown house was burned. They tried to burn it. It's the house, the castle beside the Louis convent. That house, Eastwood's, that was him. He was the landlord. He actually owned the castle. So that was all in that 1 week in the town. A lot of incidents, like, you know, 1921. You know, there was Chulainn Street and Mulholland Avenue and Mulholland Park. A couple of patriots we have. But particularly for me in later life, when I started to look at a bit of history of my family and discovered a few things, but particularly Mrs. Culhane and her connection with it, like, you know, it was that wee bit extra then, the fact that she was the caretaker in the place, and her son had died for Ireland and all the rest of it. She told me about that sort of stuff, like when my aunt looked after her, you know. The archaeological people took her over as a museum. 1909, I think Redmond McGrath and Backhouse, the business people, they were the ones kind of that got that development going. Redmond McGrath was definitely mentioned in anything you ever read about it, like, you know. They had an Irish week up there, and they had it advertised, and they had photographs they took of the maidens with the Irish wolfhounds. There's a big sign at the gate of it. But Mrs. Culhane must have went in after, and I looked up the 1911 census, and it's Callan that's in the. It's living in the castle. The castle actually is recorded in the 1911 and 1901 census. And then I went to see who owned it, and it was Eastwood. Eastwood owned most of everything there. Like, everybody who came from Farnham, like, it was their number one playground. Let's be honest, we were very lucky that way. And like, I can recall going there as a boy, as a teenager, as an adult. It always gave you a wee bit of inspiration or something about the place, you know. It was Culholland, Satanta, and I suppose for us boys, the spiritual home of the Farnham youth, because, like, when we done the puck fodder and all of that sort of stuff, like, it was, we were carrying out what he done, puck the ball from Dundalk into Ardwalker. That sort of thing would be in your head, like, you know. That was his home, that was his place. But the Red Branch nights and all that, it all comes into that area, doesn't it? Satanta and well, we certainly would have got to know more about it, like, with the puck fodder. Now, there's two stones up at the start of the puck fodder. There was taken from Castletown Mount, and there's a stone from Navan Fort in Armagh. That was supposed to be the home of Conor McNassa, his uncle, where he would be going. So there's a stone from there, and a stone from Castletown Mount up there at the puck fodder. Now, the priest got an inscription done on it, but it's very poor now at the minute. It's very bad. It needs to be redone. To us, it all happened there. It was always about the castle. The Mount would have been the number one activity area for us, like, you know, and of course you probably heard your own people talking about scrapsies and down at Top of Roan and down Bridge of Crane. When we were in Fatima, the way it was, when the summer holidays came round, you were up in the morning and you were away. And your mother would say to you, don't come back here till such and such or something. And maybe the door would be locked. Big family, didn't want you in and out all day. But we would go down up to the castle. It's hard to believe that we were not all that far from out of town, and yet we had this. You know, you had the castle, and you had the rivers, and you had the fields. And then as we got on a wee bit too, we used to go out to Roach Castle. But it didn't hold the same thing for us. You wouldn't have a date with a girl out in Roach Castle, you know, but you would have a go on the castle. As I said, there was many's a match made up there, I can tell you, up at the castle.
I asked Damien if he'd ever been inside the souterrains on or near the mount, which have long since been sealed up.
I was actually in the one that was got down at the end of that field there, out on the Grey Acre Road. Where there was one there, that was in the 60s. I was down at that when they found that one. But the one up at the castle, like where you went in there, oh yeah, we haven't went down into that. Now, I wasn't the bravest of the bravest, I'm going to be honest, as a youngster. I really wasn't. Didn't like enclosed places or anything. But I know now the younger ones would be down through that. Now, I don't honest to God, I cannot tell you how far down it went. We used to hear that it went to the Green Church, and we used to hear then that it went down to Pagan's there, down at the river there. Supposed to be an escape hatch for the pirate burn that went down, you know. Well, we wouldn't have known, the pirate burn wouldn't have come into it, but it's only afterwards, you know, you'd be reading up about stuff. But there was a sort of one found a way down at on the Grey Acre Road. There would be within an arm's throw like of the castle. Like. I remember the gate and all on that. Like. I remember fellas being put in there and the fucking gate was pulled out, locked, pulled over, you know. We wouldn't have a lock or key, but it was pulled up, you know. 2 or 3 fellas that go down into it, and the smart fellas that pull the gate. Yeah, it's blocked off now. Just exactly where that was, on the wee wall there, in the branches of one of the trees, we had a rope, and we could swing from the wall right on to the far bank from the rope that was on it. And then we'd have maybe faction fights with some of the crowd, the townies as we call them. That happened up there, but not always that often, but we always thought, like, if any bit of a squabble happened up there, like, we'd be getting involved, like, you know. We owned it. We defended it. We certainly did. Yeah, as I say, we went up there as boys, we went there as teenagers to learn a few things, and we went up as adults just to get our heads set right for something that we maybe have to get on with, exams or doing something or get married even. I always found it a place that I could always clear my head in, you know. I did know I often spent a bit of time up there. Yeah, I suppose it's amazing when you think about something in your youth, when you're a place that you loved and you played and around and you had your own magical thoughts on it, and when an elderly lady that, you know, was well in her 80s at the time would be telling you she lived there, you know, you'd have to, it didn't add up. But it was amazing, like, when I did the history, like, I discovered afterwards, like, you know, that about herself. And like, and she wasn't telling me lies when she told me she lived in it, like, you know. And there's a plaque now out on her grave. She's buried now with Patrick Callan. She's buried with him because he died in 1921. There's a plaque on it now. Somebody has done that now in Ornage Cemetery there. It's out at Dungooley. Right. It's well worth a visit to go to see it.
So from Chulaann's gleaming sword, through medieval gold, to a pirate's wine store, there is undoubtedly treasure on the mound we call Chulaann's Castle, and Mrs. Callan was the last person in Dundalk's history to hold the key to it all, as she tentatively cared for the precious items in the museum she had been entrusted to live in. Her story reminds us that the treasures of history and myth are almost within our grasp, if we only take the time to reach out and grab them. I hope you've enjoyed this series as much as I enjoyed researching and creating it. Thanks to Damien Callan for sharing his story with us in this week's episode. And thanks once again to Anthony Murphy, Paul Gosling, Connor Brady, Niall Roycroft, Shane Delaney and John Kerr for their contributions to the previous 5 episodes. Thanks also to David Bellew on sound and to Dundalk FM for their support in making this programme. I've been your host, Tara Tine, and these are our ancient landscapes.